digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined by Laura from E1, who joins us once again, Yanis from Fiber, and Solomon from Rewind. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm going to ask you to just explain a little bit about who you are and what you do. We'll start with you, Laura, since you've been with us before and our listeners will be slightly more familiar with you.
Okay. Hi again, I'm Laura Wilson and I head up development at Entertainment One. We're a company that produces and distributes film, TV and music around the world. I really work on the film features team and we sort of distribute films from the Twilight series to the Divergent franchise to sort of Oscar winners like 12 Years a Slave and Dallas Buyers Club.
Wonderful, thank you. And Yanis, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what Fiber do?
Sure. So I started Fiber 6.5 years ago. We're a mobile SSP, so we're an infrastructure platform for mobile apps to integrate, manage, optimize all your ad revenue sources. Fairly technical, based out of Berlin, with most of our traffic in the US.
Wonderful, truly global business. And Solomon, why don't you tell us all about Rewind?
So Rewind's a content production studio that specializes in creative technology and virtual reality. And we've been pushing into working with Red Bull on True VR. We've helped deliver Bjork's latest music video, Things for Lexus. And we're also working with the BBC very closely on how we can look at taking some of their really big pieces of IP and bringing them to a new medium. So most recently with Strictly Come Dancing.
Okay. So previously, I know that, Laura, when you've been on some of our sessions, we have drifted into this no man's land of VR and AR and such like. And so I thought this would be an interesting opportunity to discuss one of the areas that we haven't really covered before, and I've not really heard anybody talking about it too much just yet. And that is in terms of monetization for VR, and specifically mobile VR. And I think we'll probably start out with you, Solomon, because I know that you have a very specific view on this. And obviously, from your perspective, you've probably got a lot of experience with actually the execution of this. But when we talk about how to monetize VR, most people are saying, well, yes, it's a lovely brand experience. I know that, Laura, you've done things with Divergent, for example, and that's great, but it's very an insular experience and it doesn't necessarily lend itself to advertising. But I know that you, Solomon, have thoughts and views on the advertising models that might emerge for VR and certainly mobile VR in the future. So tell us all about your thoughts.
So with being a marketing company, first and foremost, we've made all kinds of installations. And that's where VR has had a great punch for the last couple of years. So make the world's first VR, whatever, and you put a name after it, gets you some press inches. Above and beyond the quality of the content needs to be there because it's all about a journalistic thing. But we've always worked very closely with our clients to try and make sure that the content really has worth beyond that one-off activation, because we know that at some point they're going to be able to release it to the masses. And that's about to happen the end of this month, start of next. So Q1 next year, there's going to be hundreds of thousands, if not hopefully millions of people with head-mounted display systems wanting VR content. And I think it's going to create a fundamental shift in how VR content is produced and how also it can fund itself going forward. The main reason is that VR in any flavor sits currently in the app space. So it's a downloadable app that you run on your smartphone, on your Gear VR, or on your Oculus, or on your, your Vive, or even your Sony Morpheus, or at some point. And those stores, we're all very used to doing microtransactions. So I spend $1 or $2 or $3 on pieces of game content or entertainment. But 360 video being, in my end, it's not really VR, but it's an amazing immersive medium that we can all get our hands on. We can't sell video very well. You put it into iTunes or anything else, or try and get Netflix to fund it, or try and get the BBC. But a piece of 360 video wrapped in an app that you can deliver for iOS and Android and docked with one of these devices has real value and worth again. And you can sell it directly to consumers through a platform which people completely understand. So pieces such as Bjork's 360 music video that we helped to do for MoMA, she will be able to sell, and she'll be able to sell directly to consumers. And the same with anything that the BBC creates, or even Lexus. And where content stops being a piece of marketing is it gets very interesting. What stops from a piece of something that's branded content everyone does, or an experience to let you look around a car? But if you made it a pure piece of entertainment, will you be able to sell that? And I really think people will be able to.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, Laura, because obviously from your perspective so far, the experience has always been, as Solomon infers, this branded content, this flash in the pan marketing thing. Do you think there is genuinely an opportunity here to sell entertainment versus one-off marketing?
Yes, I think obviously people are sort of moving on to mobile apps and tablets much more. And I think in talking about entertainment, it comes down to sort of single experience people might look to buy, or narratives, in which case entertainment will be sort of serialized. And I think that's possible. And obviously it's not going to be a sort of film or sort of long form content, but in things that drive people back so they want more. And people want to experience sort of short form, and then on sort of mobiles and experiencing things sort of 5-10 minutes at a time. So yes, I think it will be possible.
Okay. And from your perspective, Yanis, what do you think this will mean? Because if this content is being wrapped in the form of an app, that's a bit of the landscape that you're very familiar with. Do you think that there is more potential for something that is wrapped in an app from a VR perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, we work with a lot of app developers, and among them, obviously, game developers. And I think, VR is the perfect next-gen console device. And it's more a question of when does it hit mass media to be, like smartphones for games, the most, largest audience platform. So from my point of view, I think, with regards to monetization, you'll have, the ability to sell premium content, on a microtransaction basis. But, then the question for advertising is, obviously it's a wonderful device to create brand experiences. The question then is, how many unique user reaches behind these devices? And I think that's, with the latest, additions and innovations in the VR space, I think this is, not even, we haven't even seen the tipping point. So from my point of view, the content creator will have various channels to monetize, users, and among them clearly, will be advertising.
I think one of the interesting things there is that the change between purely branded content. So there was a VR piece done where they did a Boisson cheese experience in VR, which seemed like a very odd connection.
As long as it doesn't have smell-o-vision, then we're all good.
Well, I believe it did on the permanent installation. But it was, very heavily branded. I know it's quite funny, but heavily branded, very product placement in the rest of it. It still had, it had value in some senses, but it's not something that I would pay for to experience again. Whereas if you look at what Red Bull's been doing over the last few years, not specifically our VR piece, let alone anything else, but they've been taking the idea of branded content to the next level. So it's not just branded content. They're actually owning and creating whole new entertainment mediums. The tipping point for them and what they're doing is that piece has gone from let's pay for someone to give us some advertising with our name all over it to people are paying for tickets to go to, and people now want to buy that. And I think that space where VR is at the moment, if done right with the right brands and the right clients, they will be able to create pieces of content where people want to pay for it because it's so good. So they're almost becoming funding bodies themselves. And I think that is going to be where it really, really takes off. If a company wants to put £500,000 into making a really, really high quality VR experiences, which is almost no product placement on the back of it, and then monetize it, I believe they'll make their money back and then some from the piece of content instead of just giving it away for free.
Yeah. Yeah, and just bring that sort of back into what we've been doing with VR and film, just saying it's partly for sort of a marketing experience to drive people to the film, but if it's part of story expansion, where you're really making something that's part of that world that you're expanding, then it becomes sort of a piece of entertainment in itself that people would pay for.
It's standalone content. It has real value and worth. It won't detract from the movie. You don't see it. It will still work. But if you do, you get a heightened experience, and companion content, I think, is going to be really quite interesting. The Strictly piece that we did for the BBC is you get to sit in the audience. It's not edited in the same way the show is. You don't get all the close-ups and all the kind of crazy action, but it's a different way of consuming the same bit of entertainment. And I think the crazy thing is where VR sits in that is that we have to rewrite and relearn how to tell those stories and those narratives. Capturing something that happens is fine, but as we all know, am I involved with the story? Am I not involved with the story? Do people look at me? Do people not look at me? And all those lovely new things that make VR so powerful, it also makes it so damn hard and so new to kind of work. Why are we making it?
But, I find it really interesting because I think that there is this generation who are very on top of it in terms of trying to adapt to these different forms of storytelling. And like this generation of YouTubers, as a for example, I think there's going to be this really interesting dynamic ends of the market of people who are trying to do those very branded experiences, very high-end experiences. But I do think that there's this really interesting opening, especially with things like Lucid now reaching the market, for these YouTube type content creators, these very guerrilla content creators, to just go out there and start recording things in 180, not necessarily 360, but certainly in 180, and start to create what could almost be considered as bridge content, if you like, to give people that first step into more of a virtual reality environment. And I think that it's really interesting when you look at the fact that YouTube has now shifted to allow all of their videos to be 360 videos. I think it is giving these people an opportunity, and somebody like Lucid is really making it very affordable for content creation in the space. But what I wanted to do very briefly, because I'm aware that we're all very deep in it up to our eyeballs and we're throwing around phrases here, that our listeners may not necessarily be quite following all of those phrases or may not have even heard of some of them. So what I want to do is I want to clarify, and I'm going to ask you to do this, Solomon, because you're probably the best one to do this, but I'm going to start with this, which is that we're talking about 360 versus immersive deep VR, which are two very different things, but not everybody who's listening may necessarily understand the difference, especially filmmakers who are thinking about doing VR, who don't necessarily understand the difference between the two. So in your words, what would you clarify as that difference?
So the VR space is very broad, and at one end is 360 video, or even 180 videos we're just talking about. And that is just capturing reality in the same way we shoot anything else. But the benefit of it being is that once we've captured it, you get to look around within that universe. And if you drop it in the desktop player of YouTube, you can look around. But if you dock it into any sort of head-mounted display system, so iOS or Android phones in a Google Cardboard at the lowest end, or Gear VR, you suddenly get immersed into that world. But it is definitely a linear piece of storytelling. And in my opinion, it's not actually VR. And there's a lot of virtual reality specialists who are
purists
saying it is. They're saying that they're VR, but they've just got some GoPros and a very quick stitching piece of software and haven't really worked out what the narrative is. But it's a great place to start, and anyone can get their hands on it because the tools exist and it fits into a traditional editing platform. You know, we can put it in Premiere and we can deliver it out and people can use it. But it then goes on a swift scale from linear narratives to then through stereoscopic and what they call cinematic VR, where you shoot on better camera technology and you spend a lot more time in post-production and it becomes exponentially harder, but you get a much, much, much more, a better quality result. Then you start getting interactivity laid on that. So we can bring you into a room and then you choose whether you want to go through door 1, 2, or 3. So it's very much like choose your own adventure. Then you get into hybrid VR, which is mixing in game engine technology and video technology. So very much like we were talking about the Divergent piece, which is mixing the best of everything together, so getting characters. And then what we call true VR, which is purely in a game engine using Unreal Engine or Unity, same game technology that makes PlayStation 4 or Xbox games, and needing high-end premium headsets such as the Oculus Rift or the Valve Vive or the Sony Morpheus to embed yourself in that world. And once you're at that end of the scale, it has an infinite number of possibilities and infinite stories that you can tell because the world is utterly made by you. And it goes from one end to the other on a sliding scale. So I talk about 360 video being a gateway drug to true VR.
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm going.
Once you've had your first taste, it's pretty good. And then you say, well, we tried this. Or we tried this.
I wanted to make sure that we clarified for people. But just to throw another curveball into that mix, I'm also going to say this. If we talk about MR as well, let's clarify what the M and the R stand for, because again, people are going to be hearing these new phrases going, what the heck are they talking about? So mixed reality or merged reality, whatever you want to call it these days. But basically that immersion layer of AR and VR. Let's talk a bit more about that.
I'm happy to cover it if you like. Or do you guys want to? Do you want to?
Go for it.
I mean, you did a great job just now. So please go ahead.
So mixed or merged realities. Some people think it's a made-up acronym that Microsoft invented so they didn't have to call their new headset an AR headset. But
no, actually, that's not true, because Sulon Cortex were calling it mixed way before Microsoft did it.
That's exactly what they told me as well. But Wikipedia pages can be changed. But the reality is it's just same as an augmented reality app on your phone looks and adds something in a layer. A merged realities or mixed realities headset, such as the HoloLens, is always 3D scanning its universe. So it knows where everything is, the table, my hand, this book, whatever else. And then using a 3D engine that's built into it, I can add objects or people or screens. I can look through the window, change the weather. and it's a layer added onto it. So everything that was Google Glass was supposed to be, and failed miserably, sadly, HoloLens mixed reality headset will allow it to do. And there is another one on its way called Magic Leap that no one has ever seen. I have not. But it has a lot of money.
It's all rumour.
Yeah. We often say in the office, do you believe in unicorns? It's so, they exist somewhere, but it has a lot of investment, and by all sense of purpose, it's a very similar device. I think fundamentally, VR is going to be where I go to take myself to a completely different universe and tell stories and narratives and interactive things I've never done before. But I'll do that for short bursts or, intense bursts, the same as you go to the cinema to switch off. Whereas a merged realities headset, I will wear for half my day, because it will add an additional layer of interactivity, of knowledge, of entertainment into my world. And it doesn't take away from the reality that I'm already in. And I think that in itself, alongside where VR is going, is such a new space that by the time we're just getting our head around what VR means to anybody, ML is going to come along and mix up everything again.
Yes. As somebody else on this show previously coined the phrase, they believe that VR is the staging arena for AR or mixed reality. So you can take that how you will. But I am interested, because I think that if we kind of move on from VR and look into where we think it's headed, and what the advertising in that context is, because I think that there are some people who probably having this horrible, dreaded thought of it's going to be like Minority Report, that when you look at, a piece of clothing, suddenly it's trying to sell you, a brand and saying, actually, here's what you'd look like wearing this one, or, whatever that thing is. How invasive do we think advertising will really be in the context of this very personalized virtual experience that we're having, or this augmented experience that we're having in our day-to-day life? If I'm wearing this headset for 6 hours, how many times is it going to tell me that I need another Starbucks because it knows I like a particular type of whatever? What do we think is the future there in the context of advertising? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Yannis.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's, similar when e-commerce actually emerged and payment and logistic didn't even exist. E-commerce was pretty tough, right? And I think when you look at the infrastructure of advertising on VR right now, there's a lot of things which in the digital world, advertisers got used to tracking everything, knowing the user, still doesn't exist on VR, right? So I think there's some fundamental groundwork needed to get where we need to be. And today it's, I would say what you could call pilots in advertising, illustrating the power and the experience and probably also the emotional engagement, but still some of the infrastructural topics are not yet solved. And I think that's, so I think, there needs to, and connecting this back to your mobile device obviously helps, because there is, video advertising is obviously the fastest growing advertising format. We do tons of video advertising on mobile apps. And I think, this is essentially a infrastructure layer, which then will enable everybody to, do proper ad experiences on VR. And so I think, it will come in phases. And, that not only has to do with the technical infrastructures, but also with the region and all the other details. If you think about it, I mean, the problem of targeting, and, showing the right and relevant ad to the right users at the right time will continuously exist as it has always existed. And I think what will change is the emotional creation and experience of the actual users. But nevertheless, as an advertiser, you want to know what exactly was the effect of my campaign. And you could do everything from, like think about eye tracking, right? You see that the person reacts because that is part of the experience, which today is more difficult to do, I would say. And pretty linear if you just look at your screen. So I think there's so many opportunities which today we don't even know about. Then the question is more, when are we getting there? And yeah, I think it's going to be a very exciting world when we get there.
So Laura, from your perspective, I mean, when you're doing content and you're developing this content for the cinema, what do you think of this future where perhaps somebody is experiencing the home-end version of the movie, and instead of that billboard that had one brand on it, suddenly there's another brand on it based on advertisers paying for the real estate within the actual version of that experience. Do you think that's a thing? Do you think that could happen?
Well, I think we are seeing it already in certain sort of TV and films where digitally you can change the advertising, so something might be more relevant for particular territories, for example, or for the particular viewer. So I think there's a way that things might start being sort of tailored more on the home and systems, obviously, rather than theatrical, where with home entertainment, things will be more tailored towards who's watching it and where they're watching it. So at the same time, audiences... Hello?
Sorry, didn't Friends have a whole series sponsored by someone replacing all of the magazines and billboards recently on a TV show?
Yes, I think it's definitely, we're seeing it sort of more and more. And I think as well as audiences becoming sort of savvy, for example, to product placement and advertising, and they don't want it to be really obvious. And I think in a sort of narrative context, they find it quite disruptive, but when it's kind of there in the background, so I think in a way it will become sort of more savvy but more specific.
Totally agree.
About that.
Yeah. I tend to think it will become more subtle almost. If you're watching a clip of somebody and they're standing on a platform on the tube, that the poster advertising behind them might shift according to your preferences,
Yes, yeah.
So I think that could become something that we see happen further down the line. But I am curious to hear what you think is going to be the most exciting thing that's going to happen with this new technology. When we think about, as a for example, people are walking around with these mixed reality headsets on for 6 hours a day and they happen to pop into the cinema, is there going to be another layer of experience that they're seeing when they're actually in the theatre? Or when we're using geofencing technology or beacon technology, for example, integrated with these headsets, is it going to be something that when they're walking past a cinema or a games store or whatever the thing might be, that they're going to be getting that additional content? Do you have a particular thing that's really exciting for you right now, Laura?
I don't think in terms of content creators, people are really thinking that far ahead at the moment. Although I think they're probably very, very aware of it. And I think maybe not so much when people are in the theatre, but again, when it comes to growing film worlds or sort of crossovers with films and games, and there's a way of augmenting and expanding those experiences, then yes, I think VR will throw up different opportunities.
What about you, Yanis, in terms of what you think the future is for VR and mobile advertising? What's the thing that you think is going to be most exciting for you, maybe in the next kind of 5 years or so?
I think we're really just starting out. I think I'm most interested in how can you create a native advertising experience on VR, which is essentially personalized, because in the end, it is an extended version of mobile advertising, and that allows you to essentially personalize the advertisement. And I think that, combined with the immersive power of VR, can be very, very interesting, and connecting these dots will have a massive impact on the ad industry. But again, I think I related earlier to some of the fundamental challenges, and until they aren't solved, I don't think that there will be massive shift in budgets towards VR advertising. I think it's really the testing phase, the learning phase, and then once the reach is there, the underlying tracking infrastructure is there, the personalization is there, and also the content creation and the formats are there. We'll probably see budget shifting towards the new medium.
And what about you, Solomon? For you, what's the interesting new technological or cultural shift that you think is going to happen within the next kind of 5 or maybe even 10 years that's really going to change the face of VR, AR, mixed reality, whatever you want to call it?
Well, I think one of the most meaningful things about VR experiences at the moment is just that. They are meaningful and they are so powerful when you put them on. We spent 130 years trying to work out how to make movies and create narratives which suckered people in to have suspension of disbelief, to believe that story is almost their reality for a small period of time. And good movies, you get suckered in for a long period, and bad movies, you remember the person eating the loud popcorn next to you. But with a VR headset, we get instant immersion into that world. And with the right camera technology, it is there. It is your universe. People come off crying and that sort of thing. But that connection with the content and the medium being so powerful, so visceral, means that advertising in it in the traditional sense is utterly overkill. It's not needed in the same way because you're instantly connected with them in that way. And the strange thing I think is going to be is the big thing is I helped a thing with the BBC recently to look at human interaction going forward and where VR has that place. The documentary ends up going into a kind of a strange little dark corner of VR for a small period. But I have a theory that it's going to be part of natural evolution. Humans are already connecting with technology in a meaningful way continuously already. Most of us are. I interact with my parents continuously on Facebook, sending them images, and they're interacting in my life in that way. And I think VR is going to have that level for some people where their virtual life, the time they spend in this space, will be just as meaningful and just as powerful. And how we fit within that is going to be the really interesting thing. I woke up the other day having a memory of building a castle in Minecraft. So not using a virtual reality headset and playing a game of Minecraft, but physically is remembering that I was there in that space. And that as, connecting with, neurons and brains and memory and what humans currently operate as is the bit which gets very interesting. That version of reality being as powerful and meaningful as our current one is kind of scary. It's, my reality currently, I'm looking at this table and there's a photon bouncing off. It goes to the back of my eye. My brain says I'm seeing something. I'm putting a VR headset on. It gives me that same level of immersion. And as they get better and better and better, those lines between the both will get blurred. And I don't see it as a bad thing, truthfully.
Unless we all end up like the Wall-E future and don't go anywhere and do anything apart from sit with a headset on our head. But thank you for your views and your thoughts on this very topic. What I will say is that we would normally ask each of you to share with us your relevant social media handle of choice so that our listeners can follow you, can explore what you do, can stalk you or whatever else they would like to do. But if we can start with you, Laura, what would be the social media handle of choice?
At Laura Jane Wilson.
Wonderful, thank you. And Yanis?
At Yanis Tech.
At Yanis Tech, was that?
Yeah, Tech. Which is actually my last name, and it's very hard to pronounce.
Okay.
Especially in English.
Wonderful. We'll make sure that's in the podcast notes. Okay.
Thank you.
And Solomon?
You can find us at We&rsquo.
Okay. And guys, once again, thank you very much for joining us on this Digital Jam session. If you enjoyed this content and you would like to hear more, then please do remember to subscribe and review. And thank you once again for joining us on this Digital Jam session. digitaljamsessions.com